the first standing ovation I've had, so thank you. And it's great to be here, great to feel the energy in the room. She flew in from San Francisco this morning, checked into the hotel, and the first thing they said was how rowdy you all got last night. So I'm waiting for what you bring tonight. I think we're in the age of great change. Whether we're talking about the Arab Spring or the $15.6 million fundraising effort that was the Ice Bucket Challenge for ALS. We've all seen these movements gather a lot of energy. And whether or not we've participated ourselves, we've seen the flames. We get drawn in. On the other hand, there are really worthwhile missions that don't seem to take off. Or if they do, they don't cause the same kind of change that we might actually want. The lone polar bear. How many of us have seen this, the symbol of climate change? We might care, but let's be truthful. How much of us have changed our behaviors because of that? So what's the difference? Why do some things take off and others just stumble along? That's what we're here to talk about today, designing change. So a lot has changed at Capital One over the last 4 years. Let's admit it first. We are a bank. It is just not the sexiest place. It's not where you expect a lot of change and innovation to happen. But we have taken on a lot more risk, a lot more experimentation, prototypes like Dave just showed. We have embraced design thinking as the way that we work. When I joined 4 years ago, design barely existed. In fact, I was hired as a business analyst because the title of design didn't even exist. At the same time, the C-suite was talking about a really big transformation, how we were changing banking for good. We wanted to bring humanity back into banking, recapture the roots of testing and learning that, quite honestly, were how the company was founded. So even though that language might be slightly different than we use as designers, the values underneath it are the same. We're being human first. We're prototyping. We're learning. We're flaring before we focus. So I want to tell you our story of change at Capital One, some lessons learned along the way. And I'm pretty sure that most of you who are sitting in this room are here because you're already interested in making some kind of change. So whether that's for yourself, whether that's for your community, whether that's for your company, let's all do this together. Flashback, 1982. A schoolgirl asked First Lady Nancy Reagan what she should do if someone offered her drugs. And these 3 words memorialized, just say no. And that kicked off the drug prevention movement of the 1980s. The biggest of these was DARE, the Drug Abuse Resistance Education Program. And that was founded by the Los Angeles Police Department. So DARE had police officers go into schools once a week for a few months and speak in a classroom in full uniform for 45 to 60 minutes about the dangers of drug use. It was immensely popular. So this spread through 75% of US school districts and ultimately 43 different countries. I grew up in this age. So I remember seeing the DARE bumper stickers. I remember DARE t-shirts. I remember this emblazoned on police cars. Probably some of you do too. But it didn't work. So in 2009, 2 statisticians did a study. And they realized that adolescents that had been exposed to DARE had just about the same drug use as those who had no exposure to DARE. So what went wrong? First off, it was only a few months. And if you remember adolescence, so much changes over time. So a few months is pretty short. The second is there's a big difference between someone telling you to say no versus actually doing it, the practice of it. Saying no takes a lot of interpersonal skills, a lot of confidence, self-awareness, and practice. And none of that happened. And also, It was a police officer. There was no one that looked like you, talked like you, and dressed like you that was modeling the behavior that we all wanted to see. So although it was really popular, mostly among adults and politicians, I think the people we were actually trying to change, the kids, I wonder if they were even interested. And that's where we're going to start. So again, whether you're talking about some grand social change like this, or your company, or a smaller community, I think this is the process of change. You first have to start by just getting someone interested, getting them to care. And then once they care, ask them to take an action. They go to being invested. Ask them to repeat that over time, maybe add on even more behavior. Now they move from invested to committed. Once they're committed, they can become your partner in decision making. So now they're engaged. And yes, I did just get married 2 days ago. It was a fine-looking gentleman back there. And this is actually how our relationship worked as well. So this is human nature. And in truth, I think it looks something like this. The first hurdle, the biggest hurdle, the juiciest hurdle to design for is just to get people to care, to get them to be interested. So we're going to start there. Now, these examples that I've talked about already are grand examples, and they happen over years of time. But the truth is, it doesn't have to look that way. So I want to go first to a separate case study. And some of you might have seen this in a TED Talk that I'm going to blatantly steal from Derek Sivers. Sasquatch Music Festival 2009. This is a leader who has the guts to stand out and do something different. Now his first follower, and look, he embraces the first follower as an equal. The first follower has a really important role. It models what following looks like. And he beckons to friends, and slowly but surely, they come, and more come, and more. And notice now that the new followers are mimicking the behavior of the other followers, no longer of the initial leader. And as more join, it becomes less and less risky. Now we have a lot of change, we have a movement, we have momentum. So I think there's a lot of really interesting lessons here from Sasquatch, which in truth is what we did also at Capital One. So I'm going to dig into that story. I joined Capital One November of 2012, and I joined Capital One Labs. So the Labs is a separate organization within Capital One to create new, interesting, different product experiences. And it was intentionally created with a full stack team. We had our own product managers, designers, and developers. So we did not have to rely on those resources from the other parts of the business or get permission or approval. It just meant that we had the ability to make, to think, and to experiment in a different way. And I chose to first join the Labs because I thought if design thinking is going to take a hold anywhere, the Labs was my best bet to start. And when I joined the Labs, my first task was to figure out how to get to a success story. I wanted to show what design thinking could do, what it could make that otherwise the company would not be able to do. So I had a few different choices of products to dig into. The first one. There was an existing team that was working on credit card reward points. This is actually a hot topic in banks. Reward points, how do consumers actually use their reward points? How much do they save up? How can they exchange that? So this was not a new topic. There were many teams actually working on this, a new team set up to do it, a lot of buy-in from very senior folks across the company interested in redesigning rewards. That was option one. Option two. Within the Labs, we were already incubating a small business. It was a new business idea. It was kind of flying under the radar. And the hope was we might eventually be able to spin that out as a whole new business, which had never been done before at Capital One. So we didn't really know what success might look like. And then option 3. There was a fairly senior executive in the organization that thought, I want to reinvent checking. I mean, who uses checks anyways these days? He'd been around in the organization quite a while, and it's not like he had spun up a team to do this. It was kind of his pet peeve, kind of a pet project that he wanted to do. And he was willing to take a chance on it. But, if it failed, slide a desk project, no big deal for him. So I couldn't do all of these things. I had a small team at the time. What did I choose? I purposefully chose to not do the big, hairy project that everyone was interested in. And that's because there was already too many cooks in the kitchen. There were already so many expectations on that project that it didn't have room to experiment. It didn't have room to take risks. I think this is our first lesson, to go for the low-hanging fruit. I believe that success breeds followership, so go for the low-hanging fruit when you're starting. I wasn't trying to hit a home run at the beginning. I was looking for solid singles and doubles because I knew if we did that and showed success, then executives across the company would come to us and ask for more. And when we could show that we worked in a different way to get to those results, they'd be more open to that. So go for the low-hanging fruit. And low-hanging fruit might mean different things in different organizations. It could mean, again, a senior enough person who's willing to take a risk. It could mean the project that affects everybody but is just so unsexy that no one wants to do it. It could mean a business unit that's in the doldrums. So anything that you do is actually going to have a positive impact. Go for the low-hanging fruit. So we did that. And over 6 months, we did get to results, and we made some new experiences that otherwise I don't think the company would have been able to make, put those out into our consumers' hands. That did get the attention of the rest of the company. So after 6 months in the labs, I ended up moving out of there and into the broader enterprise organization. So if the labs was the sandbox to try it out, this was the big fish, the real playing field of Capital One. And as soon as we did that, what did I encounter? Resistance. But remember Sasquatch. Treat your followers as your equals, and I'll add, ignore your resistors. So resistance came to us in an interesting way. There were some people that thought we might be trying to steal their jobs. When the projects we were engaging with ranged everything from defining the actual problem, doing research, creating a portfolio of products, actually making the products, marketing and branding the products, how can we not be stepping on some people's shoes? So one way to approach this would have been to say, we're just different. Now, you use traditional marketing methods, we do ethnography. Or you make the final product and the final touches, I'm going to make the low-resolution prototypes. But remember, what we're trying to do is change hearts and minds. So that divide and conquer territory approach wasn't going to work. So we did the opposite. Whenever someone came to us and said, hey, I think we're doing the same thing here, we said, you're right. We are. So why don't we work together? Let's form a cross-functional team. I'll learn from you, you learn from me, and let's experiment. Let's just see how this goes. We did that enough times that eventually people joined the dance. And we would make heroes of them. We'd call them the new torchbearers of design thinking within the company. So we were embracing our first followers as our equals. And the truth is, I did try to ignore resistors as much as possible. It ends up that those that followed along, joined the dance, helped gain so much momentum that it just didn't matter. And I think this is a management principle that's hard to follow, but is really important. Let's spend 90% of our time on the individuals that really help us grow, change, and build momentum, and maybe 10% on our resistors. So as we were growing, as we were inspiring new people, we always did this in a combination. We were always both teaching and doing. So the project work, making new experiences, but then explicitly teaching design thinking too. And this is how it might work. Let's say I was working with an executive framing up a new problem. The first thing we would do is scope the problem, find a cross-functional team to work on it. That cross-functional team would go through a week-long boot camp in design thinking. The next week, they'd kick off the project so they could immediately use the new tools and methods they'd just learned in their real work. And as they're cranking along on the project, our next teaching was to the executives that ultimately would make the decision of whether or not this project would move forward. So by the time this project got to their first share out, the executives had a new language, had seen what prototypes might look like, and were ready for it. Everyone was ultimately speaking the same language. So the reason that we were doing this is because we wanted to spread a mindset and not a footprint. And I've learned this from two professors of organization change, Huggy Rao and Bob Sutton at Stanford. Spreading a mindset and not a footprint. Let's break that down. A footprint. A footprint means when you have a skill, a capability, you replicate it until it meets demand. A mindset is different. The mindsets of design thinking, biasing towards action, being human first, making to think, those aren't things that I only want people with the word design in their title to do. I want everyone to embody those things. That's a mindset. So again, it's really about changing hearts, getting people to care, getting them to be interested. So when we teach design thinking, we make it a really specific point that we're not teaching people design thinking methods or how to use design thinking. What we're teaching is how to be a design thinker. And I think that's fundamentally different. Now, let's actually go into this for a second. What is design thinking? So some people talk about it as this 5-step process where first I start out by empathizing with my customer, defining the problem, then I'm going to ideate to come up with a variety of solutions, prototype and test it, and I might need to do that over and over again. Others have a different diagram, and they say it's a 6-step process. The very first thing I have to do is re-understand the problem, maybe reframe that. Others think this is just way too linear, so let's make it into 3 concentric circles instead that you could iterate and iterate and iterate. And others think all of this is just way too logical, so why don't we draw a giant hairball that suddenly ends in innovation? Okay, so this is the design thinking process. Let's take one click in to see what the methods are. First, you start out by ripping the brief. Again, whatever the problem is that came to you, you shred it apart and you say, I'm going to redefine that. Then, through primary work, research, observation, I'm going to cluster things into themes, ultimately get down into some insights about human behavior, and narrow it down to how might we questions that can help me ideate. Are your eyes glazed over yet? Even many of us in the room that are designers, this is just a bunch of shapes and colors. Imagine if you were a bank executive and you saw this for the first time. Would you have any idea how to actually change your actions or how to behave? I don't think so. So that's our next lesson. Teach tiny habits. The teaching that we do is all immersive learning experiences. But the truth is, over the course of a week, we might be teaching 20 different methods. And it'd be really overwhelming if I then said, now go forth and do design thinking. So instead, we have to break things into bite-sized pieces. It looks more like talk to one customer next week. Or at the end of a meeting, take 15 minutes to do some I like, I wish feedback. Or in preparing your next presentation, before you open PowerPoint, map it out on Post-its. So individually, these things aren't design thinking, but they are actions that, again, as I get people interested and committed to it, they're layering it on, they're repeating it, and they're viscerally feeling the difference that it makes in their everyday work. The people that I found the most impact with was actually senior executives. And that's because they tend to be the least connected with our customers. So if I said, let's go out and make the commitment that each of us is going to talk to one customer this next week, I'd have senior executives come back with a new light in their eyes saying, I actually had a conversation, maybe at one of those cafes, and I talked to a customer about their relationship with money. They'd get so jazzed up about it that those senior leaders would tell their leadership teams to go through this design thinking training. And then those leaders would go out and talk to customers, and they'd get so excited that they would tell their leadership teams, go to get trained in design thinking. And same thing, they would get excited and tell their teams, go train in design thinking. And we have a lot of layers, so believe me, this can happen a lot. Simultaneously, we're still doing a lot of project work. We're working with developers, designers, product managers directly, giving them new tools and making new experiences that are delightful, that reach the hands of our consumers, that they can share upwards. So I call this making sandwiches. So I don't quite mean embedding a critique in between two compliments, though that works too. What I mean is we're simultaneously reaching for the highest executives in the company and trying to get them inspired to have their own experience with design thinking. They provide a ton of air cover. They do a lot of storytelling. That's the first layer. The second layer is to work with the individual contributors and from the ground up, give them new tools and new ways of working. And you squeeze the middle. So what's in the middle? Middle managers. And I think middle managers tend to be the hardest crew to change. It actually makes sense, because middle managers are one or two steps away from doing the actual work themselves. Which means even if you provide them with new tools, they might not get to see the fruits of that immediately. But they're not high enough in the organization that they're willing to take a really big risk. And in fact, middle managers are probably there because they're recently promoted for doing something right in the eyes of the prevailing culture of the company. So what's the incentive to change? So the trick for us was not to try to influence the middle managers directly, but again, rather from the top, from the bottom, and you squeeze the middle. Make a sandwich. So we continued to do this. And then I started getting a really interesting question. People started asking me when we were going to formalize design thinking as the way that our company worked. And I found that a little bit of a strange question. I'd worked in a lot of startups, I'd worked in some large organizations, but I'd never really been asked before to formalize something like this. And then I understood why. So this is our CEO. This is Rich Fairbank. Yes, his name is Rich Fairbank. He is our founder and has been our CEO, is still our CEO. And he's a visionary. It means that when he speaks, people listen. It means that all of the associates at Capital One really look to Rich to help set the strategy of what our company does and also the way that we work. So as designers, we understood if design thinking really was going to take hold across the company, really create change, it actually had to come from Rich's mouth. So we made that a goal. So for years, a little context, Rich gets up once a year and gives a 8-hour, one-man show, probably 10 times, that's declaring the strategy of the next year. It's a really impressive feat. And knowing how much preparation goes into just a 40-minute talk, 8 hours, one man. And for a long time, his strategy looked something like this. We started as a credit card company. And a lot of our initial success came from A/B testing credit cards and ultimately understanding that people with good credit scores could get lower interest rates. Pretty simple concept now, but we were the first to do that. He recognized these products, credit cards, physical products, financial products, weren't really keeping up with today. So we needed to become digital. So let's make our products digital. For a long time, that's what he was saying. Now, through the last 4 years of working with Rich, of ultimately getting him maybe to see products and services in a different way, he ended up something more like this. I think we all believe that digital is not an end. It's a means to an end, the end being great customer experiences. And he declared the way the company can do this is through design thinking. So I think there's a really important lesson in here, which is to use the culture you've got. So the culture we have at Capital One is of this visionary leader. So getting him to declare design thinking was very powerful. But that doesn't mean it works everywhere. Take Apple as an example. Apple has always been a culture of secrecy. So change happens in the grand reveal. Google is a tinkerer culture. So change happens in experimentation, Alphabet. The lesson is it's not one size fits all, but you do have to use the culture you've got. Now you can imagine that once Rich gets on stage and talks about design thinking, that demand goes through the roof. We suddenly have wait lists, hundreds of people long, trying to get into our learning experiences, and many projects that are quite worthwhile that unfortunately we just have to say no to because we can't handle that. We don't have the capacity for it. So again, at this point, there's this temptation to scale a footprint. But I think there's another alternative here. Just to build pyramid schemes. So we all know pyramid schemes, right? The healthcare supplement company that says, I'm going to pay you $10 for every bottle that you sell, but I will pay you $20 if you recruit somebody else to sell the bottles, and I'm also going to give you 10% of their profits. That's a pyramid scheme, meaning you have way more incentive now to recruit other salespeople than you do to actually sell the product. So disclaimer, companies that actually put no effort into selling their own products are illegal. Don't do anything illegal. Okay, call out of a next lesson. Don't do anything illegal. Got it? Okay, let's go back. So pyramid schemes. No, I did not pay anyone to be a design thinker at Capital One. I am talking about building structures that build themselves. So we made our students into our future teachers. Anyone that worked with us, we gave them the dual purpose of both using the methods, modeling that, creating new experiences with design thinking, but also spreading the word. And we would do this through both our curriculum as well as our project work. So I'll go into curriculum first. We have a few tiers of curriculum. The 1.0 curriculum is the introduction, the crash course to design thinking. 2.0 is this week-long deep dive. You get a full toolkit of methods. And the 3.0 is more about how to set a portfolio vision, create the conditions and the culture for change. That's for a lot of the leaders and executives in the organization. The 1.0, the crash course. 2 hours long. At the end of us teaching it, we'd ask people to raise their hands. How many of you might be interested in teaching this the next time around? And inevitably, a couple people would raise their hands. We would gather them, teach them, give them all of the content, teach them facilitation skills, and then set them loose and say, why don't you go teach the next 1.0 classes? So they did that. And in those 1.0 classes, at the end of them, they'd ask other people, raise your hands if you might be interested in teaching this in the future. So you could tell we're perpetuating this and built up a crew of about 60 ambassadors across the company that could teach our crash course. This also is what we did in our project work. So we worked with a lot of our senior leaders in the organization with our HR department and identified about a dozen high potential leaders in the organization. Now these were leaders that were already engaged in projects to create new experiences. They still owned the work. They still led the cross-functional team, but we were coaches alongside with them. So we would help that leader pick out the pacing, the process, the methods, the tools, the questions, but they still had to actually do the work. Their teams were still doing the work. And if that leader had to train their team to think in a different way or create the conditions in a different way on their team, it was still their responsibility to do that, not our team. So this is what I mean by a pyramid scheme. Again, this system that will build itself. I do want to pause and talk a bit now about the difference between design thinking and design. A lot of what we've been talking about is design thinking as a mindset. Again, being human first, radical collaboration, a bias towards action. That's different than design as a skill set. Whether you are a front-end developer, a content strategist, a UX designer, an experience designer, you have technical design skills that oftentimes are what define your role and your responsibility in your work. A lot of the teams that we see of product design and dev, design is that skill set. And design thinking does not replace design. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What we're trying to do is get everyone to work with the same culture, to use the same language, so we can all ultimately make things that customers want. Now, we've been talking a lot about the direct ways to influence change, but there's also some indirect ways. So there is another professor, BJ Fogg, who works a lot in behavior change, who said there's basically only 3 ways that this ever happens. So the first one is you have an epiphany. You see Jesus in your toast. The second is you create tiny habits, which we just talked about. And the third is that you change your physical environment. I'll share an experiment with you. Psychologists brought in pairs of people, call it partner A and partner B, gave partner A $10 and said, you can choose to share whatever amount out of that $10 with partner B. Now, if partner B accepts your offer, you can both keep that money. But if partner B rejects your offer, neither of you can keep that money. Now, the twist was before they ran this game, they showed participants some images. So one group saw images of everyday items, like a toothbrush, kites. And the other group saw images of business items, like a boardroom or a briefcase. So the group that was exposed to the innocuous images, the majority of them shared the money 50-50. But the group that was exposed to the business items, only 33% of them shared the money 50-50, which was a lot less. So it was interesting. So the interpretation was, first off, our physical environment and the cues around that oftentimes are affecting our behavior, and in this case, particularly about cooperation and collaboration. The experimenters took it one step further. And they, instead of just using images, actually set up physical rooms. So in one room, they had a backpack in the corner. And in the other room, they had a briefcase in the corner. And it's very similar results. So again, there's a lot happening out of our physical environment that ultimately is affecting the way that we behave. Here's an example of a space that we've created at Capital One. And yes, we have the heads down space for individual time. We have the group space for collaboration. But what I want to point out here are the more nuanced things. We have exposed ceilings. We use unfinished wood as trim. And the goal is out of all of that to show we're always a work in progress. It's not about perfection. We're never just done. Physical space obviously can mean architecture, but it can also mean really simple things like coffee machines. There was a pharmaceutical company that wanted to increase sales. They didn't quite know how to do that. They were also experimenting with sensors, so they put body sensors on their people. And what they noticed was salespeople who interacted with teammates and coworkers on different teams, different functions, actually had higher sales. When they realized this, they first noticed that coffee machines, they're about 1 every 6 people. That's a lot of coffee machines. And it means that people were just interacting with folks that were from their own teams. So they ripped all those out. And they said, why don't we build bigger coffee stations, about 1 per 120 people instead, and force them to collaborate across their teams. And after just 1/4 of doing that, sales rose by 20% across the organization. So physical space is an indirect way that we can create a lot of change. Now, this is a lot already. And you can think about being a change maker, and you're making sandwiches, you're building pyramid schemes. It could be really, really rewarding. So I'm going to save the best for last now as a lesson, which is just to take care of yourself and make sure that you get better at getting better. So yes, being a change maker is really rewarding, but it is also very energy intensive. And you have to replenish that. So think about your skill for a second. How can you keep atop of your game? How can you keep learning? How can you understand and know more about how your own skill is innovating? An even tougher part is just your own energy. You're going to know better than anyone else what's going to refill your tank. Listen to that voice, create the space for it. It is easier said than done. Earlier this year, I took a 2-month sabbatical. And I got yoga teacher trained. I went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which I will admit and utterly embrace. It makes me a California cliche. Or maybe belonging in an episode of Portlandia. I'm not sure which one. And this is not company policy, so this was something I had to ask for. And it was a bit scary to do that. But in hindsight, it was one of the most nourishing things that I've ever done for myself. And I think it fundamentally changed the way that I now see my work. So now at Capital One, we have made new experiences that are in our customers' hands, that I hope are delightful, that I do believe through design thinking are fundamentally different than what we otherwise could have made. We've created a lot of momentum, and yet I think there's a lot more change to come. Thank you.